This topic today goes right to the heart of the spiritual path, of trying to abide and return to Spirit, to who and what we really are. And this reading also, the scriptures give us the way of returning. It's funny because we spend so much of our time affirming our separateness from God. And you can see this in your day-to-day actions. This morning when I woke up, I looked in the mirror, I saw Devarshi as a separate being from the divine, and I started passing judgment. You know, you look in the mirror and Devarshi is not looking very good this morning in the mirror, or maybe he's looking especially sharp today. And we go through life affirming our separateness in big ways and in little ways. I'm not feeling good, I'm feeling good. This is my life, I'm learning this is my job. And we identify ourselves with our separation. And this reading in the Bible is so beautiful, the description of it, because it describes the vine and the branches. And in a way, the leaf at the very end of the plant is growing outward, and its energy is growing outward, and to some extent it's affirming its own self-identity, its separation. And the reading from the Bible especially tells us and reminds us that the way of return is this reminder that we are part of a greater whole, and to never forget that. And this is why we come together on Sunday and listen to these teachings as a reminder. It's why we meditate morning and evening, because with all these other times that we affirm our separateness, we have to keep coming back to this gentle and sometimes hard reminder that we are one with Spirit. It is who and what we really are. We are not separate. We never were separate. It's only our own delusion and confusion that makes us separate from God. And so the way of return is described in here, is to meditate. In a way, meditation, very simply, is looking back towards the trunk of the tree from the outward part. It's reversing that flow of energy that spun us out from the Creator into creation. And so it's reversing that flow, not by necessarily looking back, but by looking within and looking up to the point between the eyebrows. This is the beauty of the techniques of yoga, is that they help us to be able to do this, because it's very difficult. We drive on the way here from our ashram in Gurgaon, and there are all these signs and billboards and stores, every block, multiple times, all of them trying to convince us that we are separate from God, and that our happiness will come from indulging in and affirming that separateness. And so then we come here and we reverse that flow, looking back towards the Creator, towards really ourself as not anything that is separate. Swami Kriyanandaji, when he advised people to meditate and to pray, he said, don't pray to God. Don't meditate thinking of God. He said, pray in God. Meditate in God. Because in fact, we are in God. And when we meditate and pray with that understanding and that realization, rather than with that separateness, that's when we really go very, very deep. In the West, we have a term for what, we use the term here also, we use the term devotion very, very often to describe love for God. And in fact, it's not a very ideal term, because devotion, and even the meaning of the word devotion, implies a separation from God. It's me here, it's God there, it's me expressing my love for God. And devotion is just a very poor translation of the Sanskrit word bhakti, which has a much different meaning. It has a much deeper meaning. Its root, one of the meanings of it is the root of bhaj, which is participatory. It's immersion and being part of God rather than being separate from God. And so this really, when you practice prayer, devotion, self-offering, service, do it with this sense that we are part of God, and we are just celebrating that realization and that immersion back into the divine. Now in the reading, Swami Kriyanandaji, he explains how we do this. In Yoganandaji, with his close disciples especially, he always talked about attunement to the Guru, attunement and discipleship to the Guru as being more important than anything. I teach the techniques of Kriya Yoga, and I've done this for many years. And we all, when we read Autobiography of a Yogi, many of us, and we read the chapter on Kriya Yoga, we really wanted to learn this technique, and we understood that it was something that was very powerfully going to help us to do all these things that we're talking about. But I was very struck by a talk that Swamiji was giving. It was a recording for Indian television. And in this talk, I was just a few of us present, and I was there. I think he was saying this for my benefit, but not just for mine, but that I could share it with others. He said very clearly, simply, and succinctly, he said, techniques such as Kriya are secondary to attunement and discipleship to the Guru. Techniques such as Kriya are secondary to attunement and discipleship to the Guru. And Yoganandaji, according to Swamiji, whenever he would talk to his close disciples, that's pretty much all he ever talked about, was attunement to the Guru. And this very simply is on the level of vibration, more than anything. The Guru is in one way, he is closer to the trunk of the tree. And so by tuning into his consciousness, that magnetism draws us back to the divine. And so by just simply tuning in and thinking of the Guru, what we're doing is we're putting ourselves mentally and on a feeling level especially in close proximity to a very strong magnet. And when we put ourselves next to a strong magnet, we become magnetized. I use this analogy. For many years, I had a desk in an office, and it had a little cup that held paper clips. And so that the paper clips wouldn't all go down to the bottom, there was a little magnet on the rim of the cup, and the paper clips would stick there. And after a while, you would pick up a paper clip, and you would pick up one or two more stuck together, because the paper clip had become magnetized by being in close proximity to a magnet. And that very simply describes attunement to the Guru in its essence, which is that by thinking of the Guru, by serving the Guru, by reading the Guru's words, by being around other disciples, we put ourselves in very close proximity to that magnet, and we start to become spiritually magnetized. It really is as simple as that. And so this is really how the Guru changes the disciple. The difference with this paperclip analogy is that that works in a passive way. The paperclip is not actively doing anything. Our part, we must actively draw on the magnetism and the consciousness of the Guru through, again, all these different ways: devotion, service, mentally chanting to the Guru, all these different things, over time, start to change us in a very, very deep way by changing our magnetism. Swami Kriyanandaji, many years ago, wrote a booklet about discipleship to the Guru. And he made a very, very strong point that those who serve the Guru gain the most. He, I would say, put service to the Guru even, again, above techniques such as Kriya. And he gave it a great deal of emphasis. And he noted that over the years, he had seen people who did a lot of meditation on their own, but were not actively serving, were not drawing as much of the Guru's grace. And so, try to make this a very, very active part of your daily worship, sadhana, is some very simple service to the Guru. It doesn't have to be some huge grand thing of teaching classes and doing something that's more noticeable. It can be the simplest thing of all. It can just be a thought, an action to a friend, a loved one. That service can be the simplest, but when it's done with deep devotion, that's actually more powerful than the most grandiose service done with a sense of ego or more of a sense of how grandiose that service is. I'm going to tell a little story. It's the story of how the Indian squirrel got the stripes on its back. Do people know how the Indian squirrel got the stripes on its back? Most of you do? Satyananda doesn't, so I'm going to tell what Satyananda said.
Definitely.
It goes all the way back to the time of Ram. And at that time, the Indian squirrel was pretty much like the American squirrel. Very drab, gray, monochromatic, no stripes, no color, no pizzazz or anything to it. And during that time of the Ramayana, the time came to rescue Sita on the island of Lanka. And so they had to build a bridge to get there. And so there was a lot of very great activity. The elephants, those very strong monkeys, were bringing all these stones and boulders, and it was like this gigantic, big road highway construction project with all the big heavy equipment in the form of these big animals, doing all this activity to serve the Lord and to rescue Sita. And the little squirrel was watching all of this and was feeling somewhat forlorn, because what could this little squirrel do? All these elephants were doing this great work in these big rocks and building this great bridge. And the little squirrel was feeling sad. And so the little squirrel started running around under the feet of the elephants and the monkeys and calling out in its very squealing, high-pitched voice, "I want to help, I want to help, what can I do?" And the elephants kept telling, "Get out of our way, you're getting in the way." And they were stepping all over it, and the monkey would take its tail and push it out of the way. And so the squirrel stood back and, again, very sad, looking at this. And it really wanted, from its purity of its heart, of its own devotion and love for the Lord, wanted to serve the Lord in some way. And finally it saw that these rocks and these boulders, that they were not really very stable. They were not holding together, and they were shifting and moving around because there was so much space in between them. And the squirrel realized that what it needed was sand to fill the gaps in between the stones, and would stabilize this bridge so that the Lord could go across the bridge and rescue Sita. And so the squirrel would go to the ocean, it would dip its tail in the water, its big bushy tail, and would dip it in water, then would drag it across the sand, and all the little pieces of sand would stick to its tail. And then it would go running out to the rocks, and again, elephants, "Get out of our way," squirrels, and then monkeys would run away with its tail, and the squirrel would go in between everyone and shake its tail and shake the sand off and fill the gaps between the stones with the sand. And it did this on and on and on. And over time, it finally helped to stabilize the larger rocks, and they were able to go across the bridge and rescue Sita. And then when it came time to celebrate this great victory over Ravana, Ram was giving his gratitude and thanks to everybody and talking about this heroic effort to build this great bridge. And he chose at that time to single out not the elephants, not the monkeys, everybody doing all the heavy work. He chose to single out the squirrel. And not necessarily even for what it had done. It had done its small part, but for the devotion and the purity of its self-offering with which it did it. And Ram called the squirrel up and held it in its hands, and very gently, in blessing, he stroked the back of the squirrel with his fingers. And now you see these stripes on the back of the squirrel, which are the blessing of the Lord for the purity of its self-offering and devotion in serving the Lord. And again, a very simple thing, grains of sand, the smallest thing possible. And so service to the Guru, very simply, it's not about how big it is, it's not about how important it is, it's about finding some way from the purity of your own heart to give simply, purely, with deep devotion. And when it's done in that way, it draws the blessings of God, it draws the blessings of the Guru, it draws their magnetism, it draws their grace, it draws their power. It is really the depth of devotion more than anything. This is why Krishna ends with this reading. It's so simple. He just says, "Adore me." And so there are many other ways we can practice this. Swamiji, here in Gurgaon, I was asking him one time, I share this story a lot, but it's important enough to share often, and you'll probably hear me repeat this many times again over the years, so please forgive me. But it bears repeating. I was here visiting him, and I was going back to America. And I asked him, I said, "In your presence, we feel so much joy, and you feel so much freedom. And I'm going back home, and how can I carry this back home with me? I tell people I'm a spiritual wimp, because I was only going back to Ananda village, which is a very sacred and holy place. I wasn't going back to New York City or anything like that. And Swamiji, with compassion and understanding, he said the greatest thing you can do is very simply mentally chant all day long, as much as you can, Om Guru, Om Guru. He said when you practice this, he said you'll start to feel more and more bliss, you'll start to feel more and more inward freedom. Interestingly, he also said you'll start to feel more and more of a desire for God, because in the end it's that intense yearning and desire that really attracts and draws us and motivates us more deeply on the spiritual path. And again, it's not just mechanically repeating these things, it's doing it with a deep sense of devotional love and self-offering. There was a very interesting story of a disciple of Yoganandaji. This man didn't have very good karma. He had what the master called commotion karma. Everything he did went wrong. It just, every time he tried to serve, it just got messed up. One time, there was at the lake shrine, one of the shrines that Yoganandaji began, there was a lake there. And there was these geese that were chasing away all the ducks and harassing the other birds. And so he asked this man to go out and to shoot a gun up in the air to scare away the geese. And this is just very typical, many stories of what this man would do. And so this man went out, he shot the gun, but rather than up in the air, he shot and he killed one of the geese. A policeman was walking by and saw him do that right in the middle of Los Angeles, arrested him, took him to jail, and it created all this commotion. Very typical of this man who didn't have very good karma. And yet, he somehow, before he met Master, he heard about him. He found out where Master was in seclusion in the middle of the desert, where he was trying to get away from everybody, including people like him. And he very aggressively found out where Master was. And I think he even used his intuition to find out. He drove his car out in the middle of the desert where the Guru was. He found him, and Master took one look at him. And he said, "You," he said, "you're not supposed to be with me in this lifetime." And then he looked again and he said, "But you have such deep devotion that you overcame your karma to not be with the Guru in this lifetime." And so, this deep sense of devotional self-offering, in the end, again, this is what Krishna says. Swamiji, with these passages, he points out that there's a tendency, especially with the affirmation reading, there's a tendency to complicate things so much. And we just analyze and we try to define truth. And we have an inspiration and then we write a book about the inspiration. And Krishna brings it back to the very, very basics of how to love, how to go back, how to return. And very simply he says, adore me. And I love the beauty and the simplicity of that word, because he's not saying do all these complicated techniques and practices and this and that, and you don't have to even understand it. Adoration is something that is beyond understanding. When you think of what it means to adore, think of picking up an infant child, and it is adorable. And you look at it, and you don't have to define what adorable is. You don't have to even understand it. You don't even have to use words. You just adore this infant baby. And this is what Krishna says. This is the simplicity of the spiritual path. The essence of it is that attitude of worshipful adoration without words, in a very childlike, simple way. And then the Lord, as Krishna says, those who worship the lesser gods, go to them. Those who worship me, come to me. And very simply, it is to love with devotion, with worshipful service, with thoughts of chanting to the Guru during the day. And as we practice these over a lifetime, you will find that the power of that magnetism over time, with an overwhelming power and compulsion, draws us more and more back to our true home in God. And I will close with this reading from Yoganandaji's Whispers from Eternity. I come to thee with the song of my smiles. Whatever treasures lie in the secret safe of my soul, I have brought eagerly to thee. I have brought all the honey from the hive of my heart. Whatsoever is mine, that also is thine. The sun of my fickle hopes and happiness has burned me with dissatisfaction, and now my desires will forever quench the thirst, drinking of thee. The taper of my happiness will merge with thy blaze of bliss. The aroma of thy scented flame and its murmuring joyous waves come floating to me. In thy enchanting light I will swim forever. Teach me to drown in thy divine light and live, rather than live in a mirage paradise of earthliness and die. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.